We're back. We're on the GRZY. What's happening? Mickey Black, another year on the grind. Talking to entrepreneurs, talking to folks out here getting it. I got my man Josiah Faison in the house. He's got a new startup. A lot of times you see a lot of different faces in terms of the startup community. You don't always see a lot of brown faces. And so when you see folks in this space, I think it's important to really pay attention, hear the stories. I think that's what our platform is for, is to share those stories. But with that, no further ado, my man Faison out here in this tech game. What's happening? Tell us a little bit about your origin story, RIT fame, startup accelerator guy. Tell us about, how you got started in tech from Rochester and now here in DC, or we're in Philadelphia right now, but now, doing the startup life in DC. Tell us how it all began.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me here. Great to be here. But it began, actually, I wasn't in tech at first when I got to college. I was a finance major. But when my grandma became sick, I realized her stories were going to be lost, right? I tried to find something online to preserve her oral history. It was COVID, right? She was sick. She had terminal cancer. And so I looked online. We couldn't find anything. And my family said, let's just create a time capsule, have her write down letters and everything, because I had all these little cousins who wouldn't be able to hear her stories from them, right?
Well, so let's talk about you first, because I think there's a lot before there. Like, tell us the origin story. Like, what made you want to get into finance?
So I was an accounting major, first semester. I
The
didn't,
beans?
yeah. And I didn't like it. I wanted to do something. I didn't like the idea of just managing someone's money. And so I thought I wanted to learn how to make money. I liked the idea of, finance. I already had invested in stocks before. I had already been working before, and I kind of had a gist of what I wanted to do, right?
So what year was this that you were investing? What year?
I've probably made my first investment before my freshman year, right when I turned 18. I was on Robinhood making my first, investments in stocks.
What was that first investment?
My first investment, I'll be honest, I think it was a Midas, AMTX.
Okay.
It's an energy corporation. I had learned about them a little bit, heard about them. I'll be honest, I was really just scrolling through a lot of different stocks on the stock market, wanted to find something that might be, a little more volatile, see if it would work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I had also invested in the MGM because it was my freshman year. This wasn't my first stock, but, COVID had just hit. Everything was down. I invested in MGM, Carnival, a lot of these major organizations that had just gone through a deep plummet.
So they were discounted.
Yeah.
Good move. So how did that work out for you? Was it like immediate, or was it like an 18-month ride, or how did you navigate this first entry into the market?
I actually 3X'd on at least all of them. I continued investing that entire time. And
3X over what amount of time?
2 or 3 years, right? So like right towards my senior year, right when everything was opening back up from COVID again, there are stocks that came up. When I first got the MGM stock, it was between like $10 to $20. And by the time I sold it, I believe it was in the 40s. So
Nice.
Yeah.
So now in school, did you make the transition from finance to tech while in school?
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
So was it like driven by academic choice, or was it really like getting into the startup with your hands and then deciding, oh, I'm gonna go this? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Definitely in this time, the chicken, which was Oria, right? I actually started because of my grandma, right? I had already just done a startup competition. I was in the Tiger Tank the semester before for a different idea I
So
had.
what's the target? You said the target tank?
Tiger Tank, yeah.
Tiger tank.
Yep.
Different from sharks, but tigers.
Yeah.
So what is that? That's why you're at RIT?
Yep, because we're the RIT Tigers.
So
So
are you from Rochester?
no,
No.
I'm from District Heights, Maryland.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Born and raised.
DMV.
Yep.
So what brought you up to RIT? What took you up to Rochester?
Actually, I just wanted to go to school with my brother. Yeah. So I just wanted to go to school, get my education. It was actually my only non-HBCU on my list of colleges. And so
Yeah, you seem like an HBCU guy.
yeah, and then I knew I wanted to go to school with my brother, but also I was a little bit self-aware there that if I had gone to HBCU, I was worried that I'd be very distracted.
Party.
Yeah.
Well, but that's interesting. So I know that reality, but the interesting fact is I think the number is 75% of Black undergrads who go to HBCUs succeed in terms of graduating,
Yeah.
where inversely at, what do you call them? 75% of Black undergraduates do not succeed.
Yeah. I mean, all right. So in hindsight, I do think that it was, for me, my decision was the fact that I had a little bit of self-awareness about myself. I had, as in high school, I knew I wanted to just go party, right? I knew I wanted to get that education, but also, I grew up in District Heights, Maryland, like one of the most predominant African American communities in the state, like in terms of like amount of, the
Yeah. Grew up in Columbia, Maryland, and then lots of friends in PG County and the area.
Yeah, so you grow up, you're in an all black community, and so I was like, I wanted to see what it might be like, and also on top of that, what really came down to the decision was also the admissions deadlines. Like I put in my applications, but in terms of the decisions, I just got a late decision. But in hindsight, I would say that a lot of the time we did think that the HBCU route would have been better. I mean, I definitely got my fruit out of the PWI of RIT, but I would say a lot of African Americans, especially the males at PWIs, they do have a little bit of a more rougher, isolated experience than maybe if we had gone to HBCU. And we talked about it all the time. So
Gotcha. When you say isolated because of the cultural differences and all that stuff.
it was a huge flip, growing up in District Heights, pretty much everyone's African American, Hispanic, maybe some Caucasians there. But then at RIT, you're suddenly the only black kid in the class, right? And then trying to go out to the parties and things like that, it's a completely different vibe,
Yeah. So now, but you seem to have done well in that accelerator, in that incubation space. How did you get into that avenue there?
So I got into the accelerator. Crazy enough, when I was first actually talking to the RIT Simone Center, I was actually on a ship in Alaska. I was actually I was talking to someone named Dana Wolcott. He was one of the innovation coaches there. And so I was telling him I wanted to get into the accelerator, keep working on the startup I was making, which was Oria. Yeah. And then I applied. I ended up pitching. I pitched the idea to them. Originally, just an idea of being able to preserve, I actually really started with predominantly preserving the media of someone's life, because at the time there wasn't iCloud shared albums. People didn't have timelines. I didn't really know about solutions for that. And then also preserving stories, right? So
yeah. So you had the idea while you were on the ship, Alaska.
So all right. So here's how it started. Grandma became sick my sophomore year. She was already sick, but this is when it was becoming terminal, right? And so I had already done the competition the semester before. They said, hey, you can join this class it was a student entrepreneurship class, right? And so I'm taking the class. I'm actually working on the idea with someone else's idea, but he happened to quit and leave our team. And so I told the rest of the team, hey, I have this idea I've been wanting to do, tell my grandmother, right? And so we started working on it. And by the end of the semester, we were pitching to a panel of judges, and they really said this would be a really good idea, right? I had also gotten encouraged by my mom when I told her about the idea of creating something so we could preserve grandma's stories. It's just, the problem was right before I got home, a week before I was coming home to actually come see my grandmother, a day after her birthday, she had passed, right? And so that was when I was like, we should keep working on this, right? But I was scheduled to go onto those ships in Alaska that summer. So
Gotcha. Now, did that make it almost more of an opportunity in that? Because when you were when I read about the whole ship in Alaska thing, I know Alaskan. Well, I don't even you were with fishermen, but was there? Because I know Alaskan Eskimos have this big culture, and it's one of those places where culture is in danger of dying out because not a lot of people live that way anymore. And so when I almost thought of it almost like an opportunity in terms of the culture that was there, but was that part of it or no?
So we didn't really get to meet many indigenous people. Predominantly, my crew was we actually had British, Russian, Norwegians. My captain, Brent, his family, I believe, had Swedish and Norwegian background.
So it's like an international crew.
But they're all based in Alaska. Well, they all were in Alaska, but they all had background somewhere else.
Gotcha. So what was that? That was for school? That was with your school? Or
no,
what were you doing in Alaska on the ship?
So I had a friend, Timothy DeGray, and so great guy, by the way. He's an athlete, worked on the salmon ship since he was a kid, right? He was telling me about it. He was a friend of mine at RIT. And so he told me, hey, I work on ships in Alaska. And I was like, that's cool. I said, does it pay well too? He said, yes. And he told me how much you could get paid. I told him, I want to get a job on a ship, right?
How much did you get paid?
You can probably make between 10 to 14,000 in the summer. Yeah.
All right.
And so as an undergrad, I'm 19. That's a good summer job, right?
Yeah.
And so I told him, he connected me with the captain, and I ended up applying. They just asked me Had I done manual labor before, which I had? Was how tall I was? Do I do sports? I was like, yep. And they're like, all right, that's good. And that's it. You know, you don't need that much. So
That's,
yeah.
that's wild. So now did you do a lot of the programming for the initial prototype app, or did you work with a dev team, or how did you manage that? Were you technical before? How did that go?
So I didn't do the code myself, right? I was still stuck into my finance background, did a lot of financial, but I was like the founder, right? I got two of my friends, my friend Conrad, who I knew was a great marketing person. I got my friend Ishan, who I knew was an excellent developer. I told him, let's work on this. I did learn some Figma, right, to create the, the screens and everything like that. But then ultimately, so we could focus on what we needed to do, we just outsourced part of the screen mockups. We outsourced to someone and he developed it. And by the end of the summer, we had the mockups ready, but also you're able to put on a VR museum and walk through my grandma's life in a VR museum. And that was right when VR was still relatively new and everything too. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah.
So now I'll ask you an interesting question. So I know a lot of people every day have ideas, or, what people need, or, what would be great. What do you think is the definitive thing that kind of separates the doers from the dreamers? What was that thing that separated you from those who just dream about it every day? Specifically because you had to put a lot of things together. You didn't do the code, and so you put a lot of things together that were outside of your skill set, outside of your remit. And I'm saying this for a lot of people out there who are listening to this, and in that situation, I think I meet people all the time who have these ideas, and maybe a year or 2 years go by and they're still with this idea. What do you think was in you that enabled you to put the team together, but also execute on the idea the way that you did?
I mean, I at the end of the day, I think it all just comes down to how much you want it, right? People always tell me like they think that I've done amazing and they kind of think that it was a lot quicker and simpler than it was. No, like I was working on it. We had financing, we had burnt through cash, we went through it all. But ultimately, the thing was that for me, I just stuck with it, right? Like I have friends that have had amazing ideas. Some of them are still in business, but the ones that aren't in business, the only reason they're not still in business or aren't still working on it is because they gave up. That's, in my opinion, that's really what the only difference that it makes. And also how much you believe in how significant the problem you're solving is, right? So like, because for example, for us, we interviewed hundreds of people and we had people who, for example, want to use our app because their son had passed away, right? And they want to preserve the legacy of their son. Or people who, like in my case, who we lost someone and we wanted to make sure that that oral history was preserved because it was vital for our own preservation, right? So I think that's what it is how much commitment you actually have to the problem you're solving.
I love it. That is the only reason why I think that's a big difference. I think a lot of people are attracted to how much money you can make with an app or going viral or whatever. But I think when you look at it from that perspective, it gives you the passion and the persistence to carry on. So I'm a big fan of that. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to pay some bills with a little bit of a commercial break, but we'll be back to talk about this app because there's a couple of things that I really want to dig into. I think people will be excited to hear.
All right, perfect. All right, sounds good.
Boom, boom, boom. You start talking a little
Hello.
bit. Boom! We're back. All right, folks out there on the grind, we stay on the GRZY. Welcome back. We are here. Josiah Faison talking about the startup game. But you already know. We're back and we're going to dig deep this time. We got a bunch of notes. I got like 10 pages of notes. I did a dig.
Yeah, that was pretty expensive. I should myself.
So we're going to dig deep. We're going to spend some time really talking about the significance of the application. I think you're doing some really important stuff. I really want people to know about your journey because it's been a long journey. Specifically, there's a lot of folks out there that want to know about the startup game, specifically in technology, and are a little bit lost in terms of how it works in real life. So let's dig into that a little bit. So now you guys, are you launched the app? Are you live already?
Yeah, so we launched our mobile app last year on both Android and Apple. And we actually just launched our second application, which is a web app. We just launched online last month.
So same like core database but web and mobile, or is it two different apps?
So they're going to be integrated, right? The mobile app really works as a family library right now. We're expanding it towards communities and organizations. Whereas our web app is specifically for recording in-person interviews, right? And so, for example, we're at the library right now in Prince George's. You can open up our web app and then you can relay their story, record a story and relay it directly to the library system. So we just launched that. We did interviews on Thursday.
Nice. So now that's another thing. So it makes total sense for a lot of corporate partners, specifically brands that are into the storytelling aspects and legacy aspects of culture. What type of partnerships have been successful for you so far?
So we have roughly 20 or more partners right now, but most recently we've become backed by Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
During the Award Infinity program, we're improving health equity in the Washington, D.C. area. We've just launched a campaign, had a call with them this morning where we're launching to the Tongans. And so
talk about that a little bit. So it's because it's a lot. And I'm interested in a couple of pieces, specifically the John Hopkins piece of it, specifically because health equity has such great implications specifically for minority communities, Black community. I wanted to say Black communities, but it's not just Black. Well, when you're talking about Latin, Asian, even Jewish populations, a lot of times health equity plays a part because for minority populations, you may not always get the attention, the record keeping, the legacy information about some of those health issues. How are the folks at John Hopkins using that? How did that start? What was their attraction to what you're doing? How did that work?
Yeah, so people often forget how much insight can be found through stories, right? And so we were originally invited to apply because we have an idea of preserving stories and turning stories into healthcare insights. When we were first starting and launching the application, we went to senior care homes where we were interested in first to just, allowing the seniors to have something to tell their stories and stay engaged with their families, right? But then you realize there's things you can use for engagement. And then, for example, getting more background context on patients because someone's life story can have the information that could be used for their diagnosis or for their treatment and therapeutics or substance abuses and various other things, right? Where our backgrounds, our stories have a lot of that information, right? And so what we want to do is we want to be able to allow people, if they opt in, to tell a lot of their stories, especially if they're going to their healthcare, and really just getting more information towards their healthcare provider.
So is there any particular examples so far, or where are you guys with the John Hopkins partnership?
So we have a few therapists that are using the application. Our first one was a therapist named Veronica Clark. She's using it for preserving the stories of first-generation fathers and turning them into stories or information for educating future fathers who grew up without a dad, right? And using our application for when someone is coming to her so she can have them use the application before they come in and she gets more information about them, right? They're basically journaling and we turn that into information she can use so she better understands her patients.
I work a lot in technology myself. Many years ago, I worked with the team at IBM for Watson. And one of our partners was Mount Sinai, and they used it for AI. And this was over 12 years ago. This was before I had my son, who was 12. So that was a long time ago. But what they were using it for was similar to the therapist, so collecting data as patients were input, and the AI would crunch the data and help with diagnosis. So the time the person spent sitting there in the waiting room wasn't wasted time. It was, by the time you get to see the doctor, has some sense of.
Exactly. And then on top of that, for example, for a senior, a lot of the time when they get into these senior care facilities, they become isolated, right? And at this time, when they're older, their main activity is storytelling, right? And so when suddenly they don't have anyone to tell their stories to, they might experience cognitive decline because they're just not speaking as much, not doing as much. Then they become agitated. And then on top of that, they're just less engaged. One insight we found was that only 1 in 8 seniors are engaged in healthcare and senior care. And so that's the problem we want to help solve is.
So how does it work with seniors? Do they talk to the computer, or is there an intermediary person they can talk to get the story? Or how does that work?
So they can tell their stories on our mobile app. We made it super accessible. They helped actually design the front end design for it. And then we're also going to have our web app's going to be basically a storytelling iPad app in the senior care facility. So they can sit down, come tell their stories whenever, and they can stay engaged with their grandchildren. Their grandchildren will be able to ask them questions. They will be able to keep telling stories. And also the senior care facilities might be able to use it to actually improve how they engage their seniors.
I love it. I think that's important. I think that's super, super dope. So the other piece, that's another interesting piece, and I'll tell you why. I think the number is like it may not be accurate, but I'll say it. Like every week, like 3 or 4 languages die on the planet. So whether it is like Asian languages or African languages or South American, but there's these languages where maybe it is in South America where the population is so small. It's like maybe a village where there's only 200 people left and these languages die out. Like, oh, I think there's like on the planet, maybe let's say there's 10,000 languages, all combined. And we're due to lose like something like 1,000 languages a year. I see this. And so with that comes a lot of loss of culture, but also a lot of loss of history. Like these, just because certain cultures are small and certain cultures are in decline doesn't mean that they're any less important or worthy. And so I see the application playing a big part in that. And the whole project with the Tongan tribe, I see as an example of that.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about how that came to be, how they're using it, what the plan is there. Is it free for them, or do you get like is it like a government contract? That would be dope. But how does that all work?
So because it's so early on, right now it's a free mission, right?
Gotcha.
Because for us it's the idea of really making an impact. So it really came about because I happen to know a Tongan who his father had passed away. I just reached out, asked him, hey, can we help preserve your dad's legacy? Right? Turns out his dad was a chieftain and he's Tongan. And so next thing you know, we've been doing calls since, started working with them. And now for us, we think we can really lay the ground for building up actual digital library that can be used to actually build a possible future museum, future archive that's really used for education of future generations of Tongans. When it comes to the languages, I think that's true as well. Like if we can capture as much language as we can, it can be used. So for example, if someone who was a descendant of those people can regain their original language. So that's what our goal is. We want to capture it before it's lost and make sure it can be used for education. So
I love that. I love that. Do you guys do any work with universities in terms of the data and like the stories, or like how do you guys? What is how does that work?
So we primarily do it internally. We are looking for universities and organizations to partner with us. We've been reaching out, and so I won't name drop any, but yeah, we do want to work with local ones, especially in the local space of the DMV area.
Yeah.
Where, our predominantly of our teams from the area. So we have a foundation there.
And talking about culture and talking about history. So I know you've been doing some stuff with the organization, with some of the Cambodian historical occurrences. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we are working with it's a new organization named Freedom. It's a new mission. The founder, he was actually fled Cambodia as a child. And he was talking about how for the Cambodians, almost half the population was wiped from the earth, right? They were murdered, right? And so for us, it was a Cambodian massacre in the 70s, right? And so a lot of them want to preserve the stories, the history of what that was like, but also the stories of what they were like before then, because they've been spread out across the world. For example, he's in the US, but he talks about how he knows Cambodians that have been in Australia, France.
So he was there?
Yes, he was a child and he was actually one of the refugees that fled Cambodia. And now he's successful working in Texas as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how are you guys, what are you doing in terms of that story? How do you even go about, like, it's such a big thing. How do you go about approaching a project like that?
So he's managing the campaign. He's using our web app. He's going to have people in the Cambodians he knows, they can come tell their stories. But also, once we actually integrate the web app with the mobile app, people are going to be able to relay their stories directly from their mobile app, tell their stories, and they can add their narratives to the campaign.
Wow.
And so we're going to build a digital repository of all of those narratives.
So it's got a social aspect to it. So that's incredible. So not only do I or one has the opportunity to record their own history, but there's a communal aspect to it where you can share experiences from different aspects. That's super powerful.
Exactly. And I really think it's important because so much do people forget how much communities change over time. Like we were recently talking about the changes in DC with gentrification, right? And we talk about how Georgetown, many of our grandparents grew up in Georgetown. It was a predominantly black, but now people couldn't even imagine it being a majority African American part of the city if you've been to DC, right? And so,
Yeah. It used to be Chocolate City.
exactly. And so we think it's really important to preserve that. And then also we were talking about music like go-go, right? We don't hear about go-go dances in high schools or anything like that anymore. But when I was growing up, you went to a go-go and
Yeah.
people are worried about that being a music form that's slowly diminishing, right? And it's important parts of the culture that really tie us to our backgrounds.
Yeah, it's a super powerful cultural aspect to what you're doing, which is super incredible. So is it mostly US centric users, or how does that shake out? What are you looking at?
So it's mainly in the US, but we also have users, crazy enough, they're actually spread out across 40 countries. Of course, for the data set, it's not that significant in many of them, but primarily the US. We also have a good amount of users in Norway. And so I actually recently got to go to India to try and figure that out.
So hold on, that's interesting. So you have users in India and you see them and you decide to just go to India and see.
I mean, listen. So I had a reason. My friend's sister was getting married, but when I got out there, I already had a mission. I was like, let's try and figure out, because it's one of the longest lasting like historical cultures in the world that's like really been passed down for so long consistently. And so we've interviewed people while we were there. We interviewed newlyweds. We were able to meet with the Ministry of Culture there. And we really think there's a lot of potential for especially India, where it's so vast, so many people, but also people don't realize there's so many different cultures in India. Like, it was my first time leaving the country and it was so diverse. It was actually really cool. It was a really amazing journey. Yeah.
So now you met with the Ministry of Culture in India. How do you get that connect? How does that work?
So I'll be honest, I used the American card. I did use the American card. So I had sent out some emails. I looked up like the Ministry of Culture museums around. I was emailing and I said, hey, I'm an American. I have a startup for preserving oral history in America, but I'd love to connect with you all while I'm here. I'm only here for 2 weeks, 10 more days. So can I connect with someone?
So how did that meeting go? How's that? How did that go?
It was really well. It went really well. We were talking about the possibilities there, especially because, oral history is so vast. So we are going to keep exploring that in the future, right?
Definitely. And the reason why I kind of dig into that, because I want to share the aspect of your story, the tenacity and the perseverance and the resourcefulness that it takes to start a startup and stick with it. How did you guys start?
So we started because I wanted to help my grandma, right? I wanted to help her preserve her stories, but the solutions just weren't adequate, right? They took too much time. They had journals, but also they were expensive. You could hire someone to try and create an autobiography. That doesn't really work. And then dull, right? They mainly just put out, I know the books are good, but I personally think my grandma, she wouldn't fill out one of those books, right? And so ultimately she ended up passing away before we could find anything. We tried to create a time capsule and we lost that history we were trying to preserve for my little cousins. And so I kept working on it. I ended up getting into an incubator at RIT after also doing 2 classes in between that time while working on that idea, pitching it to RIT Simone Center. I was accepted, got some funding, like $10,000 in funding, built my first small team. And by the end of the year, I was in the finals for the top software in New York State.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And so I made it there.
Now, and I don't want to lose the fact, because I you don't often mention this, but I saw, so the app Oria is named after your grandma.
Yeah, my grandma's name was Gloria. Yeah.
So now how did you come to that decision to name? How did that happen?
So it was a tough scenario of how it actually came along. So we were originally named Tail. Our company's still Tail Innovations Inc. But in 2024, we were doing our trademarking for the application. And it turns out that someone had trademarked the name before us. Actually, 2 weeks before we were trademarking the name. And so I had to make the decision of whether I would try and spend money on keeping the Tail name and possibly go through a whole legal dispute. And, I was thinking like, I have limited funds, right? And so I just ultimately decided to move on. I decided, listen, let's move on with something else that we could trademark and be more unique. And I was going through ideas for months. Like, I'm saying I was sitting in my friends' yards, just staring like in despair of the fact that I really did feel hurt by the fact that we lost our name, because I've been saying Tail for 2 years at that point. And so I thought about why we were really doing this, I thought of Oria. Came from my grandma's name, Gloria. It also had, sounds familiar for oral history. It has a lot of different meanings. And so that's what we decided to stick with. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I discovered it because, well, when you said the name Oria, it sounds so natural. Like it's almost like we used to talk about oral history or orator, or like I thought it was some sort of like Greek mythological historical thing. But then, and I knew the story of your grandmother. And then when I saw, oh, this is the name, and it was just was like super powerful.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure people heard that because I think it's super meaningful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
super
you.
meaningful. So now that was another piece that I wanted to get to. We're gonna get to the startup journey because I want to. There's a lot of people who have a tough time navigating the startup journey. So I want to get some of the tips from you and your journey, but I want to make sure. Well, you know what? Let's take a little bit of a detour. They say. So now you were talking about competitors and the other options that you were looking at.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think of stories and legacy, like StoryCorps is where I think of, like the whole like an NPR, and they go around collecting stories. How is that different from what you're doing, or you ever think about that in terms of an influence or an inspiration, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think StoryCorps in its own right is a great solution. Right. I think it's great for what they're trying to do.
So now, for people who may not, StoryCorps is probably like a very middle class. So for people who don't know, what is StoryCorps?
So StoryCorps is a platform where you can record oral history, and really lots of institutions use it, like some libraries and, NPR, they use it. No, you can submit your stories, right? However, in my opinion, while it is accessible in its own right, I don't think it really serves families or organizations in the way we want to. Where we want to actually build a digital repository that also builds connections, right? StoryCorps might hold a story, but in my opinion, it doesn't really make it shareable. It doesn't really scale towards different use cases for different like sharing circumstances between friends, families. And then on top of that, it's really just a story collection tool. Whereas its impact, how do I say, StoryCorps is like it's just a window to preserve a story, but I don't feel like it actually makes them shareable. Like, I don't think it really fully works in the way where you can really share stories on that platform. Like, that's what I think it is. It's really just a platform where you could collect them, but you don't share them with family. We're like, in our app, we have family trees in our app. We have different ways of turning stories into consumable content. We have ways for organizations to better engage. StoryCorps, in my opinion, has been a great mission, but we're just doing our own take on it. I personally didn't really dive into StoryCorps. Like, of course, you've seen their application used a little, but it wasn't something that actually played a role in our development journey.
I'll talk to successful entrepreneurs, and the story I always hear, and the reality of it is it sometimes takes a decade, to get there. And I know you talked about the development taking years and having that perseverance to sustain over years, over team members coming and going, and you being the anchor, so to speak. Let's talk about some of those times. How long has it been? Tell us a little bit about that part.
I mean, yeah, I agree with the idea that it can take like a decade. I mean, for me, it hasn't been a decade, but like it just takes a lot of effort that people don't really account for, especially if you're a founder that's really starting from the ground up with their journey. So I don't know if I mentioned this before, but for example, I talk about how when I was working on the ships, I was reaching out to the RIT Simone Center and stuff like that, right? But even then, I was starting to interview people. Like for if you really want to have a good idea and you want to know your idea is worth something, you have to talk to people, and a lot of people, not 10, not 15. We interviewed over 300 people during our ideation phase. I interviewed my crewmates in between while we were on the ships. I interviewed captains. I interviewed people in town. I was interviewing people even during the incubators. I interviewed hundreds of people. I was going to the malls, getting kicked out of stores for interviewing people. It takes a lot of effort because you have to, first of all, you have to validate that whatever you're working on, if you plan on working on this idea for long term, you have to make sure it's something that's worthwhile before you waste a lot of time and money building something that was never a problem to begin with. And so the way we even got to that point was we were just interviewing people when we were first making the mock-ups. We asked them what they look like when we were first interviewing about like whether this was a problem they had. We weren't even asking them, hey, do you wish you could preserve your life story? We were just asking them like, do you care about stories? Do you care about memories? And then we let them tell us more, right? And all that takes time. And then even after I graduated, I had the accomplishment of like the finals top software and like the New York State and all that stuff. I actually, because I wanted to work on Oria and I wanted to keep working on this startup, 2 weeks after my graduation, I had already gotten a job working as a construction worker. I had a college degree, but I wanted to be able to work on that during the daytime. And so I started working in concrete construction. I was working from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., sometimes 4 a.m., oftentimes on weekends. And so I'd go to work at 6 p.m., get off 2 to 3 a.m. I'd get home around 3:30, 4 a.m. I wake up at 10 a.m. every morning and I was cold calling senior care centers. I was still like using my own funds to actually pay for like talent to create mock-ups. I was doing it to also pay for developers out of my own pocket. I opened an LLC and then I realized it would be better to have a C Corp for investment. That's also something you might want to know is that if you want investors, it's better to have a corporation a lot of the time because they want to be shareholders rather than just partners, right? And it's so much learning you have to do. Like you have so many hard lessons you have to go through. And then even then, for example, after all those months, our first actual angel investor was the owner of that construction company because he had learned that I was down there working on the app during my lunch times, which was 11 p.m. at night. And he was really interested in like what we were building. But even then, what really made it wasn't the fact that I was working hard. It was the fact that by the time I was pitching him the idea, I had a pitch deck that went through the entire solution, the problem we're solving, the mock-ups, what exactly we wanted to do. And then on top of that, I had the validation of saying, I've already interviewed 300 people. I already have 500 people on our wait list. I've already been putting effort for at least over a year to 2 years at that point. And so that's the thing. And then even then, we didn't launch in the App Store till a year later. And so I started my construction job. The first day of that shift was my 22nd birthday, May 31st. We launched the app on the App Store the next year on my birthday, May 31st. And then this year, we hit 1,000 users on my birthday of May 31st. And so even then, through this entire time, we've had to learn. Well, of course, you have to get good mentors, right? But at the end of the day, you have to realize a lot of it's going to be learning. Like you're basically going to run into a wall until you run through it as a founder or run around it or jump over it, right? And so, for example, learning how I didn't have a software background. So learning how to properly manage talent when you might not have a CTO sometimes. Learning what makes a good CTO, what doesn't. And people always tell you these things, but if you really don't listen, a lot of hard lessons, right? And so then, and then you have to take them on like, for us, our big grand accomplishment that I always anticipated was having an app, right? I was like launching the first app. I thought it would be a breeze after that. We launched the app and then it was filled with bugs, right? And so for the first month or 2 months, we were fixing bugs, right? And then on top of that, when you first launch your software, you're really just launching it at an MVP stage. So you're just launching something that's just functional enough that you can say, people, you can use this to solve the bare bone of your problem, which for us is being able to tell stories, right? And then we had to take months to actually make, for example, the profile functional. So that's the timeline, making the albums functional. So you can actually upload photos, videos, voicemails onto the app, the family tree functional. And then still on top of that, we still have other features that we originally planned that aren't even live yet, right? And then during that entire time, you're realizing there's so much more to the problem you're solving. If you're really learning about what you're doing, it's going to take you're playing an infinite game. Like lots of people, they usually think it's this finite game where you're just going to work on something 18 months, get out and boom. If you have that type of idea, great. But majority of the time you don't. And so like where we are today is not where we ever anticipated it. And the problem was that we just had to learn and learn. And that's what's made us better. It's made us, a more credible venture, a more, successful venture, a more impactful startup, right? And then during that entire time, it's not like you're just only supposed to like build pitch decks or just discover. You're really supposed to be building a business. So we're interviewing people, we're getting them to sign up, we're getting some of them to like their organizations partner with us. And during this entire time, we've just built a track record of credibility. And so that's the way I've built and see it with startups is that you have to realize you're really playing an infinite game if you really want your startup to be successful.
That's powerful. I like that infinite game perspectives. The funding side of the journey. So a lot of people get stuck or discouraged. Like typically if you'll ask an entrepreneur, like, oh, what's your problem? What are you stuck? Everybody's, I don't have any money. I need some money. Where do I get that? So how did you guys, well, one thing I want to highlight is it's no small thing. Number one, that you actively worked a job that facilitated your being able to do what you want to do. But I think it's quite a testament when your boss sees you moonlighting and instead of giving you trouble, he gives you money. That's a testament to, number one, the quality of character of person that you are, because you work for him. So he knows your work ethic. He knows.
Yeah, I showed up. I'm near here every day for a reason, you know?
So he knows that you're trustworthy. You could have some people, they might work, but they might not be the best employee. And the employer knows, like, oh, yeah, this guy's a joker. I'm not.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing. But how has the rest of it been in terms of the fundraising journey? What advice would you have for others, whether they're in school or just out and about? What advice would you have for them on that fundraising journey? Because also, just to contextualize, you're well in the game. So right now, you're in the middle of a $500,000 bridge round on the way to $4.7 million initial capital raise. So it's no small thing. So I think you've got a lot to share with a lot of people out there would totally love to be raising sorts of numbers. But I understand also you didn't start out there. How did you get there? What are some of the steps that people can take in the middle to kind of start out there?
I mean, I'll be honest. I think a lot of people find a reason not to make $1 as early as possible. Like, I remember we made our first $1,000 in revenue before we even had the app. We told people, hey, would you be interested in using our software? They said yes. We told them what our premium would be, and they said we would give you the dollars for it. And so we made $1,000. And then eventually we made $5,000. And if I could go back, I would have never stopped doing that over and over and over and over again. Because that's what really validates. And I always tell people when they ask me, like, how do I make money from my business, right? There's so many ways to do it without having the idea as a complete product yet. And sure, like, if you have certain products, you might want to, have a product first before you take money for it. But there's startup competitions, right? I always advocate for startup competitions because that is a low-hanging fruit. If you're really solving a problem and you can really just, especially with the tools you have now, where you can have Claude, you can have something like
or Replit.
Gamify. You can have Gamify make you a premium grade pitch deck straight off your idea. And if you really just put in a little bit of work to organize your idea together and ask some people about the problem and really can articulate your problem, you could win a lot of money in startup competitions. As an undergrad, we won $20,000 in capital, and we were only an idea. We just had a dream. And then on top of that, you have to realize also things are going to change a lot if you're not raising fast and you're not really trying to build on your business as fast as possible. Like, for example, we're all in this current state of affairs, right? Where the way people are gaining capital, like certain markets are down, like preservation's lost a lot of capital underneath the current administration, right? That's not a secret. But because of that, we had to learn how to pivot. We had to learn how we were going to make ourselves more useful to the organizations while still being able to help with preservation, but meaning we might not have those same programs we could go get capital from as we did before, right? Like, you just have to learn where the capital is in your market, and you can't be afraid to ask. Like, the worst thing I ever did when I was a young founder was that I was too timid about asking for money, because I'd work construction, I'd work myself to death, but I didn't want to ask someone else for $1. And I feel like that was really what cost me a lot, because I definitely back then had people that I could have had as investors. But then because, for one, I wanted to build a lot of it myself. But then on top of that, someone would say they're interested in investing, but myself would be in my own way and be like, they're not really interested in investing. And I think that's something that we have to get over. We have to really take advantage of those opportunities. When someone says they'd be interested, follow up. If you want to get money in the startup world, go to do the startup competitions. They're everywhere. Your city has one. Your college probably has some. And then, to be honest, some people are creating startup competitions. I know people that are literally creating startup competitions, and they're just getting cash together, and they're just trying to find any founders they know that will compete in that competition for some cash. And so I think the best way is startup competitions, but there's endless ways.
That's amazing. I think one of the highlights that I see in your story is just the preservation, the tenacity, the audacious moves, whether it be reaching out to the dude in India or just the sheer number of consumer interviews that you did to prove out your concept. Super, super tenacious. So I had something that I wanted to touch on that.
Also, one other thing I'd also say is a lot of the time people don't really realize that they're trying to go from to 100, where you have to go from 0 to 1 first. Like a lot of people, they think you can they hear about it all the time. Someone from Stanford or Yale, they just raised $3 million for their idea. And I recently had a friend of mine who was trying to raise X amount of capital when he really only needed a certain amount to get to where he needed to go. And on top of that, he should also include a small amount for himself so he can really work on his ideas at the same time. Because one thing I do also think a lot of startup founders do is they neglect themselves a lot in that early stage. They don't pay themselves as well. And so that was one thing that also I would recommend. Because even when I first got my first check and we were at the 100K raise part, I still wasn't paying myself $1. And I feel like that also is something that a lot of startup founders, in my opinion, I think I should have paid myself a little bit just so I could, eat a little bit without having to worry about making some money on the side.
I think sometimes it has to do with self-worth, like deserving. Like sometimes founders don't feel like they quite deserve it or have earned it yet. And it always feels, I guess the quality of your investor has a lot to do with it. Not all investors are made equal.
Of course. But a lot of the time though, we don't even communicate with our investors on those things. Like I feel like my investor, I know for a fact, would not have been concerned if I paid myself.
Because you got to eat. You
yeah,
gotta live.
I got to eat. And at one point he asked me how I'm eating. I told him I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. And I realized that was something that I should have really taken into consideration. But at the same time, though, I come from the idea of put your money into the business, make money later. But I realized lots of the time that's something that someone that has that luxury is telling you to do.
Yeah, because I think historically, wealth works different ways in different circumstances. So say, for instance, I've got an aunt who is well off, therefore the cousin is and doesn't have to worry about, how am I going to pay the mortgage this month because their house is bought, and so they can go and do a startup idea without the concern of, the financial risk of it all, which so often in our communities, we don't have that luxury.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you spoke on that piece. The other piece, I remember what I was trying to remember just a moment ago. Another piece of it is networking, socializing, and being in rooms where they're having these conversations. I think a lot of times in our communities, entrepreneurship is synonymous with hustle or like scam or like whatever.
For sure.
In some rooms, I've been in literal rooms or, entrepreneur masterminds where they're talking about raising funds and they're telling you how to get $20,000 on a credit card. Like that's not fun.
Yeah, no.
That's not.
Don't do that.
So a lot of it is being in the right rooms and having the appropriate exposure. I started out like working on Wall Street, so I started in the room. But if you're not there already, how do you navigate connections in this modern environment? How do you identify whether it be mentors, organizations that are worthwhile in terms of connectivity? How do you navigate that component of the journey?
All right. So there's a lot of ways to really find your way to someone who's either can invest, can join your team, guide you to capital, give you opportunity. Firstly, I'd say there's plenty of networking events. Not saying just go to a networking event. I'm saying if you want to do a startup, go to a startup event. There's people that are in that room. There's probably at least 1 or 2 angels. And if not, there's someone in there that knows venture capital firms, right? Going out to those events, especially when you're in your early stage where you have a good idea and like you're trying to figure out, you just need some guidance. Rather than going straight for the dollar, You can go straight for, hey, I need advice. Hey, can you help me? I have an idea. And lots of time they're going to have a way to help you. And there might be a potential partner, or they might have someone who will be a potential user or partner. And that means capital, right? And then on top of that, there's incubators. Like I've been a product of the startup RIT Student Accelerator, Simone Center. I'm a graduate of Founders Institute. I'm currently in the Johns Hopkins Ward Infinity Fellowship. And in each of these circumstances, they led me to partners, network, and more. Because the thing is, these are places specifically for getting you to capital, getting you network, and making sure that's your success, because that's what makes them successful. And so I think it's really finding your way to those organizations, especially because if you're not used to the startup world, that is the startup world, is getting into those conversations and getting your name out there any way possible. Because now, once your name gets out there, you'll realize you can gain like credibility and network very, very fast. So
That's amazing. Speaking about getting your name out there, so you guys have been doing a great job of entering into the market, and I know it's a crowded marketplace. We talked a little bit about, let's talk about a couple of the competitive options in your set. I think you guys are a really fresh and new app. There's a lot of new competitors in the space, specifically with the advent of AI. But talking about historical players, like there's a couple I know, there's Storyworth, there's StoryCorps. I think we were talking about Memento before. What are your thoughts on some of those historical competitive players? I know there's a lot of new options in the market, like AI twins. I think I did an article actually only about maybe 2 months ago. I did an article about one of the apps that takes a mirror. It's an AI twin, basically.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? We'll start with the traditional options. What are your thoughts about those? And then we'll talk about some of what they might call the darker side of the industry. What are your thoughts?
So the industry's outdated, right? From our standpoint, Storyworth, Memento, all these organizations were around when my grandma was around, right? But the problem is, majority of the time in this space, all they do is you give them answers, they give you prompts, and you get a book. And the problem with the book is that no one's going to read that book. And on top of that, the book can be lost. The prompts tend to be generic. For example, Storyworth, you get an email, it's not accessible. Your grandma does not want to get an email typically and just get a book at the end of the year, right? And then with Memento, they're the upgraded version of Storyworth, right? I've met the founder of Memento, great guy. They recently were on Shark Tank, did very well. But there's the same thing. You get prompts and you get a book. And the thing is, people don't realize, especially in this space, if you're in this space, that's not something difficult really to do. You can easily pull together some prompts, ask people questions, and output a book. But the problem is it's not scalable, and no one's grandchildren is going to listen to that book. And are you really helping preserve system? For us, we want to preserve stories at scale. We want to actually help society. We want to help make impact not only for families preserve their stories, for communities preserve their stories, and also build infrastructure for future organizations to actually preserve history, right? And then use those stories for more than just, hey, this is my story. We want to make it so we're actually making an impact on education, preservation, healthcare, and other spaces, right? And so that's what's really made us different, is the fact that we're trying to actually innovate. And also, we're just solving the problems for our users, right? And now, if we go into the dark AI side of the space, I'm always asked by seniors whether we're going to replicate them. We're always asked if we're going to turn them into the Terminator. That is the most common question I get. But for us, that's something that we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because we don't think that's solving us a problem for people. In fact, I think it's going to cause more. For example, we had one user, his son had passed away, right? And so when we were talking to him about what we're doing with our solution, we ended up talking about those, like the dark AI products. And he talked about how, while he wants to preserve the legacy of his son, he would not want to hear a replica of his son's voice, because he knows that's not him. And you're going to be going down a rabbit hole where you can create problems with how people grieve, how people might stay attached to people after they have passed. And on top of that, it's just not really who they are. You know what I mean? And so that's why I don't see synergy with that side of the space in that instance. So yeah.
One interesting one that always comes to mind is StoryCorps. I often listen because I get up early in the morning. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I listen to NPR. And it's even before the news, so this always comes on. What do you think about what they've done in comparison to? I know it's more of a legacy platform, and what you guys are doing very much forward-looking in an app. Where do you see that in comparison to something like almost like iconic? Like,
I think StoryCorps has done great for what they've intended to do, right? They've captured a lot of stories, captured a lot of narratives, and of course, they've made it so a lot of stories have not been lost, right? But if we're going to move forward, I think at this point they are outdated, right? I think in terms of how they help their users, they're not really solving the problem of a family losing their family's history, right? Because still then it's something just in the archive of StoryCorps, right? It's not something that's easily shared with their loved ones in the terms of like accessibility, meaning that your family can easily find that story, easily, consume that story and really help capture someone's entire life's work. I don't think StoryCorps does that. I think they're more so like they capture instances. And I just think that to be frank, I just think we're just innovating in our own right. I think we're really trying to make an innovation that's going to, I like StoryCorps. I do like StoryCorps, but I do think we're going to out innovate them in terms of how we actually make an impact. And especially when it comes to making it easy for anyone to preserve their story, making it easy for any organization to capture history. And in terms of actually streamlining the process of capturing stories and outputting them to actually help organizations serve their communities, like we are already serving our partners in a more impactful way than StoryCorps has ever. You know what I mean? Like, sure, they have the ability for you can go in StoryCorps, answer some prompts. You can record something using text, audio, video, I think. But in terms of actually like making it something consumable, I think it's just their legacy solution at this point.
So looking forward, because I agree, your solution and platform, I'm specifically impressed with the social aspect of it. I think that's important because I think when you're talking about moments in time, culture, and that sort of preservation, I think the social dynamic of having the different perspectives makes it a more rich experience. But wholesale, where are you guys going now? So you're here, you're in the marketplace, you're raising capital, you've got a really great application. Where does this go? Are you trying to get acquired? You're gonna sell to Google? You're gonna make $1 million? You're gonna go hang out with Sam Altman? What's the deal? Where does this all lead to?
No, we want to go public in 2034, 2036.
So you're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be doing this for the next 10, 15 years. You're in.
Yeah.
You're on the long run. Talking about going public. And so what you have like a 10-year horizon in front of you. So you're in the long journey. You're in for the long haul.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts or plans about that in terms of, because that's super big. Like, are you planning to acquire your way there? Are there other companies that you would anticipate acquiring and growth through acquisition? Are you thinking just scale through consumers? Are you also thinking about other tangential services to create like an ecosystem, or how do you see that happening?
So we just keep doing what we're doing, expanding our impact in terms of reaching that point. If we really just when we have our goals in terms of like how much we want to make, how much revenue we want to be generating by the time we get to that point, and our market size and which verticals we want to be in. I can't go too much into it, but yeah, we just plan on continuing to grow, continuing our impact and doing what we're doing now, and also expanding our offering to different verticals where we think we can make our greatest difference. And
so what do you see in the next, say, 12 to 18 months? What does that look like near term?
That's a good one. So our goal by this time next year is that, firstly, we want to have, I'll be honest, we're growing with the pace at which we're doing things, especially on our technology. And I was going to go into that, but because of how fast we're developing now, I can't even imagine where we'll be next. Like, it's true. And then on top of that, I really want us to be really making our impact with our user bases overseas, especially when it comes to underserved populations here, but also underserved populations or communities where they are most at risk of being lost across the world, right? This time next year, we want to actually be running campaigns across other countries where we have people on the ground who are not only like we're really just the platform. We want them to be able to run their own campaigns, run their own organizations, run their own oral history, and be able to capture their own narrative without even needing to speak to us. All we want to do is enable that. And then this time next year, we also want to be helping organizations that are affected by the current administration. We want to help them make the impact that they wouldn't be able to make otherwise, but also we want to help them make a bigger impact with or without the current circumstance than they would otherwise. So
yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because the aim and mission of preservation, whether it be language, culture, art, quite frankly, is under attack. Quite frankly, I think the current administration uses it as a tool to diminish other cultures. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the current context, current administration and its impact on institutions like museums, universities, NGOs? What is your perspective and where do you see Oria really being able to have an impact?
I mean, in my opinion, I think this administration, the way they're taking this or trying to handle preservation, I think they're just part of a dying breed because we don't have to rely on institutions to control the narrative of history anymore. Like, if they want to change something in a museum, go for it. At this point, like, we can unlock more online. We can build our own spaces. We don't need the administration or the same institutions the way we did before, right? Like before, we needed the resources of an entire institution's funding to even collect stories, to output it, turn it into something for the community to come engage with. We don't need them to like endorse it, in my opinion. Like I when people ask me like whether I'm concerned about them removing things from, for example, the National Cemetery's website, I'm like, no, because we knew who they were. And at this point, there's no point. Like we don't need them to do it for us. So
awesome. Amazing. So with that, let people know where they can find Oria. What is the easiest way for them to engage? What call to action? What's up? Where can I get on?
So you can download Oria on both iOS and Android at Oria-library. You can also follow us at Oria.io on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. My name is Josiah Faison. I'm on LinkedIn. We're also known as Oria on LinkedIn, but also our website is missionoria.com.
Missionoria.com. I love it. So look out for Oria in your app store. Get engaged. Man, I'm encouraged. I'm inspired, and I'm going to be on Oria. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
All right. So that's it. We'll see you next week. Until then, stay on your grind. Get on your...
Never lazy, never dizzy. Pockets fat, hustle steady. Hands busy, focus sharp, see the prize. Get the bag on the GRZY, never stop, never lag. Concrete jungle where the wolves don't sleep. Dreams in the gutter, but the climb runs steep. Chain swing heavy, not for show. For the weight of the blood, sweat, tears. Ain't no twist of fate. Every step a chess move, rook to the queen. Hustle sharp enough to cut through the sheen. Money talks louder